Hello, in this tutorial we will show you how to connect two different subnets using a wireless connection. We will be using two different routers and intermediate access point as a bridge. We will also show you the setup for each router, including IP addresses and any necessary other settings such as gateways, DHCP, you will also see a live connection to the routers and all the necessary setups to make it easy for you to implement. Finally, we'll show you important notes regarding the setup of the wireless distribution system WDS and the NAT, Network Address Translation. First of all, this is the sketch that presents the actual setup. We have first subnet, which is router 1, connected to the internet, and we have a second router, which is the second subnet, which is in a remote location, which we need to connect wirelessly to the first router. In order to be able to connect the two routers together, you must have an intermediate device, which is in this case an access point that acts as a bridge. And in this case we're using the WDS bridge. WDS bridge allows you to connect access points together. You simply type in the MAC address in the remote access point. The access point will have the MAC address of the first router. Will be typed in the access point here in order to be able to communicate with the first router and to make the bridge. It's also recommended, but optional, to have the main router, the main station, WDS station, also connected via a bridge to the access point, in which case you'll have the MAC address of the access point typed inside the router 1. It's not required it's not a mandatory requirement, but it's better to have it this way for transparency of MAC address and clients. The access point itself is connected to the second router through a WAN connection of the second router. So the second router WAN connection will be connected to a LAN connection of the access point. Now, in a WDS setup, the client station in here, the WDS client station, will receive a DHCP IP address from the first router. The access point itself will have a static IP address, but anything connected to the access point will actually receive an IP address from the first router. So the access point will have its DHCP disabled, switched to off. Router 1 will have DHCP set to on, and router 2 will have DHCP also set to on. Second router will not be required to have any WDS setting. The access point here will provide the necessary bridge to connect two routers together wirelessly. This is the setup you will need for the first router, the bridge, and the second router. The First router will have a subnet 1, 192.168.1.1. Second router will be 192.168.2.1, and the bridge will be within the same subnet of the first router. We'll have a static IP address. It will have DHCP switched off. This is important. As DHCP switched on both subnets. The gateway setup also shown on the list here. The second subnet will have its WAN address or WAN port set up as a client of the first subnet. The WAN connection of the second subnet here, it has a static IP address of 192.168.1.20, which is within the first subnet. This is to enable the second subnet to be routed to the first subnet through this port, which is the WAN port, which is connected to the bridge. So data will go from the second subnet through the WAN port. The WAN port will be within the first subnet, so it will be connected by cable to the access point. The access point will bridge the connection and the data to the first router, which is the same subnet. So the WAN port, access point, first router, all within the same subnet, technically. WDS support is required for the access point. It's an optional for the base station, and it's not required for the second router. WDS support, in this scenario, I have used the same brand by both TP-Link routers. It is required or recommended to have both machines connected via WDS from the same manufacturer for better compatibility. Okay. Further note, all the communication that we have from the communication from router 2 to router 1, it will be in one direction. So router 2 will be able to communicate with router 1 and will have internet access. Router 1 will have internet access as well, but in the first scenario, router 1 will not be able to connect to router 2 because of the NAT setup of router 2. We will need to, in order to be able to access router 2 from router 1, we would need to disable the NAT and set some static routes. So the first option, which is the normal one, will be router 2 connected the normal way with NAT enabled. It will allow this router to connect to this router and to the internet. Computer in this subnet will be able to access computers on this subnet, but in this subnet here, the computers won't be able to access computers on this subnet. This is the scenario required if you want to isolate the two subnets. Say you have a business setup here and a personal computer setup in here. You don't want people linking in the personal network to access your business setup in here, so you leave your NAT connection on, and this will be ideal. If you, however, want connection to be shared or the communication to be shared from both networks, you will need to disable the NAT in this router and enable static route on both routers to be able to communicate with each other both ways. I have actually a live connection, and the first router is 192.168 1 it's the router 1, and it's a TP-Link Archer C5. Second router is another TP-Link, it's a WDR 3600. And the third router is router 2, is an Edimax router, and it's a BR6324. This is the second router, this is the first router, and the WDR 3600, which is 192.168.1.10, is the access point acting as a bridge, WDS bridge. So router 1, when we log in, okay, this is the wireless connection for the router, and as you can see, we have two different bands for the communication, 5 GHz and 2.4. I've set up the 2.4 GHz as the WDS, and I've given it a name for the wireless communication, WDS 24 1200, and I've set up the channel number. It's important to match channel number, network name, SSID, and in here we have a setup for a WDS name that I'm going to connect to. SSID to be bridged is WDS 243600. Now that's actually the MAC address and the network name of the other machine that we are connecting to. So if you press survey, it will show you the networks available, and you can see the other machine which we have here, the .1.10, which is acting as a WDS client. If you look here, this machine is called WDS 24 3600, and it's in here we typed the SSID and MAC address of the first one. So essentially you are swapping SSID and MAC address between the two machines. And this one and the 3600, you type the SSID and MAC address of the first machine, .1.1, and on the main machine we type the SSID and the MAC address of the other machine. We also need to match password of the actual link between the two, and the communication mode must be the same. I mean, if you look here, we've got WPA2, PSK, AES password. Communication mode password must be matched, as well as the SSID, channel number, and we type in the MAC address. Once we've done all that, then you will have an established connection. And if you look here at the main machine, 192.168.1.1, router 1, WDS status is run, which means it is connected. So when we go now to the second machine, which is 192.168.1.10, and we look at the DHCP, it is disabled. You just set up the gateway, which is .1.1, because it's connected to the first router. On the first machine, we will have DHCP enabled. If you look here, it's enabled. So this will give addresses to all client connecting to the remote machine, which is the WDR 3600. Any client connected to this machine will receive its IP address from the Archer C5, router 1. And the second router, it's a different brand one, because it's not going to be requiring WDS support. So I have an EDIMAX standard router with a LAN connection and WAN port. In the setup, I have the WAN port set up to a static IP address. The WAN port of the second router is connected to the WDS bridge, and it's been set up as a static IP address within the subnet, within the first subnet, because the first subnet has a .1 address, so I've selected .1.20. DNS will be your first router, and the default gateway will be the first router. And you could also set up the wireless communication for the second router for the client, but that's independent of the first router. It has its own wireless setup. Set it whichever way you like for client to connect to the second router. LAN connection, it's 192.168.2.1. It has a DHCP enabled. It's a standard connection. And if we go to advanced setting, then we will see there is an entry for NAT, but every router will have its own way of setting up the NAT. The options available will be different. Some routers may not allow you to do this easily, so the success of setting NAT on and off with static routes is going to vary, and sometimes it's not going to be successful depending on your router. These are the options available for the NAT. I'll go to static routing. You can enable static routing to turn off NAT function. So when I've selected this, I essentially turned off the NAT, and I can now enter static routing. I've added a static route into the second subnet. Now this is only going to be required if you're going to need access on both ways for routers to communicate with each other from both directions. If you want to isolate your networks, keep router 2 isolated from router 1, you don't need to disable NAT. Just keep the NAT setting on both routers switched on. However, if you want communication on both ways, you need to disable NAT on the second router, and you need to enter static route 192.168.1.0 on the second router, and it should be, the destination will be the first subnet, and the gateway will be the WAN port of router 2, which is 192.1.20, and you just set, apply and save. On the first router, similarly, if you want communication to cross the NAT of router 2, you would need to go to advanced routing, and then set up a static route, which this time destination will be 192.168.2.0, and the default gateway will be the same 192.168.1.20. It's the same port linking both subnets. The success, like I said, with static routes and NAT is very much dependent on the model number and the type, and it's not always going to be successful doing this. So ideally you would leave both networks connected with NAT switched on, and isolating the network. But if you want to make communication possible both ways, you disable NAT, try static route. If that doesn't work, you have an option such as enabling or installing custom firmware such as DDWRT, and it has dedicated router mode or gateway mode, which you can try. It has a better compatibility with regard to switching in different modes. It's worth trying, and I believe you have a better chance of succeeding with that. Okay, so this is the connection. Let me just show you. I have a command prompt here. So I have set up all my routers now communicating with each other. So at the moment my computer is connected into a, this is my PC, and it's connected, as you can see, to the second router. My IP address is 192.168.2.100, which is the second subnet. My gateway is 192.168.2.1. So currently I'm connected to the second router, which is the remote router, not the one connected to the internet. And I can now ping 192.168.1.10. You can see that is the access point bridge. And then I can also ping the remote or the main router, router 1. Sorry, the router 1 will be 192.168.1.1. Again, it's communicating. So I'm getting communication from both the bridge and the first router while connected to the second router. And similarly, if I want to connect my machine or laptop to the first router, I will be able to ping the access bridge and the router 2 if I have NAT switched off and static route set to with the correct setting. But normally you will not be able to ping router 2 while connected to router 1 if NAT is switched on, because NAT is a security layer, act as a firewall, and you will only be able to ping from router 2 to router 1, not the other way around. That's the natural setting. Okay, so this is all the settings that you need in here, and WDS is the ideal bridge because it connects base stations together and provide MAC address transparency, all the details regarding client passed across. You can use other type of bridges, but they may have limitations, and your client may not be able also to connect to your bridge, because some type of bridges, they won't allow client connection at the same time while it's bridging the connection. If we move on now, there's some notes finally for you regarding WDS and NAT. Like we said, WDS connects access point together and allow Wi-Fi client connection at the same time, so your client can connect to the WDS stations while WDS stations connected together. A pass-through MAC address of clients that are connected. It has limited compatibility, so you are required to use same brand if possible, and you must match SSID, channel number, password between the two stations. With regard to the NAT settings, the second router NAT, obviously it's going to be switched on, and then router 1 will always have its NAT switched on because of the internet security. So router 1 must have its NAT always on because of the internet link. When we were talking about NAT previously, we were referring to router 2 only, whether you enable it or disable it. So basically, if it's on, you isolate the two network, then communication will only be possible from router 2 to router 1, which is a good thing for most circumstances. But if you want communication both way, it may only be possible with certain setup, certain routers, and you'd have to set up some static routes to be able to achieve that. Hopefully this has been useful to you, and we'll have more videos coming up soon. Please consider subscribing to be notified of any future videos, and thank you for listening.